All right, Rabosai. A good Mayed, the Piskatava, good Kvittel. It is Baruch Hashem such a schos to be able to be here together, to learn together Mirat Hashem on Hoshana Rabba night, Erev Shmini Atzeres. Such a schos Baruch Hashem to be here together in the sukkah. We thank our sponsors for tonight's shir. Wait 1 second, sorry. We thank our Talmud Torah sponsors, Baruch Hashem, for Tafshin Pehei, the Tilson family of Eretz Yisrael, Chusra Besoros Tovos Am Yisrael. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for Tishrei, Dr. Linda Weinberg, in loving memory of her husband, Dr. Paul Weinberg, Paris Moshe ben Avram, David, Avram and Shane D. Kelman, in memory of their parents, Strom and Bernice Kelman, Alexander, Frederica David. And we thank also our Tikkun Leil Hoshana Rabba sponsor, Mel and Karen Ram, Li'ilui Nishmas, Mel's grandfather, Shmuel ben Avram, whose 80th yard site is tonight. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshama will have an aliyah, the family in Nechama. We thank all of our sponsors for their generosity. And of course, we take the opportunity to wish Yoni Frager a very happy birthday. Baruch Hashem, a very happy birthday. There's a gift table set up in the back. There's
no gifts.
No gifts. All right, so let's get started. We have a lot to do tonight. Baruch Hashem, a really incredible and beautiful daf ahead of us. Tonight's daf. To actually remember again. So tonight we're doing Leil Hoshana Rabba's. We're doing Hoshana Rabba's daf. So Hoshana Rabba's daf. Tomorrow morning's daf is Kuf Chaf 120. So we are picking up Emir Hashem on the bottom of Kuf Yotes on the base 119b, the last line. So if you remember again, we left off in the middle of a discussion over here that there was an incredible miracle that happened for Benos Slavchad, that even though they did not marry until later, or the Gemara calls 40 years old, there was a tremendous miracle that occurred, that Baruch Hashem, they were still able to have children. So the Gemara compares the miracle of Benos Slavchad to the miracle of Yocheved. What happened with Yocheved? So the Gemara says, "Nasalam neski Yocheved kidichsiv." This is incredible. You'll see, by the way, just always the confluence of events of Gemaras that we have, Baruch Hashem, over the course of. Really, you need a seat. You can't hear. Yeah, come. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'll try to. I don't think it's working. I think they turned everything off. Yeah, okay. So in other words, the Gemara says over here, like Yocheved. What happened with Yocheved? So the Gemara says, "Dichsiv vayelech ish mi beis Levi, vayikach es bas Levi." So the pasuk says that a man from Levi came and he married a woman from Levi. So we'll say, so remember again, of course, the man from Levi is Amram. The woman from Levi is Yocheved. So the Gemara says, top of Kuf Chaf 120a. Efshar bas mea ushloshim shana v'kar labas. Now again, as we're going to see in just a moment, Yocheved was 130 years old. So could it be that a woman who's 130 years old would be called a bas? In other words, it says, Vayelech ish mi beis Levi, a man from Beis Levi came and married a bas Levi. So bas Levi makes it sound like she's a young woman. But again, as we're going to point out in just a moment, Yocheved was 130 years old. So again, even if you want to say 130 at times of the Chumash is not like 130 today, it's still old. So what's the pshat? So the Gemara says, Dam Rabbi Chanina zu Yocheved. This refers to Yocheved. And what happened with Yocheved? So the Gemara says, Shahorasa b'derech v'nolda ben achomos. So she was conceived on the way down to Egypt. In other words, again, this is when Yaakov and his family are coming down to Mitzrayim after Yosef revealed his identity as the viceroy. So everyone's coming down to Egypt. So Yocheved was conceived on the way down, but she was born in Egypt itself. Her birth was in Egypt, but her conception was not. So we'll say, so what do you see from here? Obviously, if she's conceived on the way down to Egypt, so again, the Rashbam does the math, but you see that Yocheved is 130 years old. So how could it call her a bas? How could it call her a bas if she's 130 years old? So the Gemara says something so beautiful. So you see from here that a miracle happened and that Yocheved became young. She physically exhibited signs of youth. What happened to her? Nis'adein habasar, her skin became soft. V'nispashtu akamatin, her wrinkles were, I don't know what the right term is, ironed out? Sure. Smoothed out, unwrinkled, right? V'chazar hayofi l'mkamo. And her beauty returned back to its place. So we'll say, so the point over here that the Gemara is making is you see that we have precedent for this concept of righteous women experiencing almost this rejuvenation of youth. So the same way that Yocheved was 130 years old, but a miracle occurred that ultimately again returned her to her physical youthful state, so to Benos Tzlafchad also were returned to their physical youthful state, so to speak. The Gemara says, Vayikach, but 1 second. Why does it say that Amram married her? So Vayikach sounds like he's marrying her for the first time. But remember again, both say, you know the story, right? Remember again, Amram was married to Yocheved. Then what happens? Paro decreed, Kala bein hayilod hayora tashlichu. Paro said, throw the boys into the Nile. So at that point in time, Amram pretty much divorced his wife. He separated from her. He said, what's the point of establishing a Jewish family if all Paro is going to do is throw our babies into the Nile? So remember again, that's when Miriam came along and Miriam said to her, Miriam says to her father, your decree is worse than Paro's, because Paro only decreed on the boys, but your decree ultimately again is on the boys and the girls. So Amram listened to his daughter Miriam and he remarried Yocheved. That's the pasuk over here. Vayelech ish mi beis Levi vayikach as bas Levi is referring to Amram remarrying Yocheved. To which the Gemara says, so if he's remarrying her, why does it use the lashon of vayikach? Right? Vayikach sounds like he's marrying her for the first time. It turns out over here that Lamaisa. Is there a chair there? Right. Good. It turns out that Lamaisa, really again he was remarrying her. So what happens? So the Gemara says, Vayikach vayachsami baile. So why does it say that he married her? Can you?
Yeah, it's very, very close.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So why does it say? Right.
Love you.
So why does it say Vayikach? It should say Vayachsar. He remarried her. To which the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda bar Zivida malami she'asa b'maaseh lekuchin. So we'll say this is beautiful. It's beautiful. Rather, what does it teach us? It teaches us that Amram remarried. Maaseh lekuchin means he remarried her. He performed another wedding for her. Because listen to this. Hoshiva bat pirion. He put her under a bridal canopy. Va'aron u'Miriam mishorim lefaneha. So we'll say this is so beautiful. Aaron and Miriam were going ahead and singing in front of Yocheved. So we'll say you just have to imagine this scene for just a moment, right? So here, and just to understand the context, right? So Paro's throwing the baby boys into the Nile. Amram says to establish a Jewish family is an exercise in futility. He separates from his wife. His daughter Miriam says, Father, what are you doing? What are you doing? You're compounding the problem. At least Paro's only goes around the boys. You're being goes around the boys and the girls. Boys and the girls. So Amram remarries her. So now this is the remarriage. And what's happening by the remarriage? What's happening by the remarriage? It's a major simcha. And the children, Aaron and Miriam are singing. If you look at the wide line of the Rashbam, the first wide line, Mishorin, mitoch simcha shaya asid Moshe Rabbeinu latzes mehen, v'hainu dichsev ladas maya asalo. So remember again, they're celebrating. Now why are they celebrating? Because remember again, Miriam was the one who prophesied that her father. Oh, thank you. It works. So Miriam was the one who prophesied that Lamaisa, again, her mother was going to give birth to the person who was going to provide the salvation for Klal Yisrael. So the Gemara says as follows. So therefore, can you imagine the scene? Then Moshe, literally again, Miriam and Aaron are going ahead and dancing in front of Yocheved and. Perfect. Thank you, Ali. Thank you. So Miriam and Aaron are dancing in front of Yocheved and Amram. We'll say, I just want to point out, the Gemara says, Malachei Hasharis Omrim, and the Malachei Hasharis, what do the Malachim say? Eim Habanim Smecha. We'll see how incredible. That pasuk in Hallel we've been saying every day. Who is the mother of the children who is happy? So the Gemara posits that's Yocheved. That's Yocheved. Why do they call her the mother of the children? Because at the time that she quote unquote remarried Amram, ultimately Miriam and Aaron are dancing in front of her. I just want to point out just how profound this Gemara is. You know, we're learning this Gemara, mamish like Erev Shmini Atzeres, Erev Simchas Torah Eretz Yisrael, when we're coming up to the yard site of so many precious Kiddoshim. So just understand that the strength of Klal Yisrael is the ability to continue to celebrate, and the ability to continue to dance, and the ability to continue to be with Simcha, even in the midst of incredible tsar. Just understand what's happening over here. As they're having this chasana, what is Paro doing? Paro's throwing the baby boys into the Nile. Right? He's continuing to do that. And yet, again, what are Amram and Yocheved doing? What are they doing? They're celebrating a chasana. They're building. And I will say, people are asking, what should we do this Simchas Torah? It's not a shaila. What do we do this Simchas Torah? we dance harder, and we sing louder. The answer to the events of Simchas Torah Tafshin Pei Daled is not to mute the Simcha of Simchas Torah Tafshin Pei Hey. That would be a victory for our enemies. The avot of this Simchas Torah is you dance until your feet give out, and you sing until you no longer have a voice. And when you're in the circle, you hold the hands of the person who's in front of you and in back of you just a little bit tighter. And when you have a hakafa, you squeeze that safer with all of your might. That's the avodah. That's what a yid does. What does a yid do in the face of adversity? We double down on simcha, and we double down on living a meaningful and impactful life. So as literally, again, the Jewish babies are being thrown into the Nile, what are Amram and Yocheved doing? Lahavdil, they're renewing their vows. They're building a Yiddish family, and Aaron and Miriam are there dancing, and the entire mishpacha filled with a sense of hope and optimism for what is going to be an incredible and beautiful future. And Avosai, that is our avoda in these days as well. Incredible to have this Gemara. So the Gemara says, Minan HaKosov, Derech Gidulas, and Minan HaKosov, Derech Gidulasan, Vekan Derech Chachmasan. So the Gemara says as follows. So later on, so we'll go back to Benos Slavchad. So there are two different ways that Benos Slavchad are mentioned in the Torah. So the Gemara says later on, the Torah mentions them in age order, Derech Gidulasan. But here, when it comes to discussion about the Yerusha, so the Torah counts them Derech Chachmasan, kind of like in order of wisdom. Nisayele Rabbi Ami. Rabbi Ami is actually fascinating. The yeshiva, halach achar chachma, b'mesiba halach achar zigna. When there is a yeshiva, now the Rashbam points out over here that yeshiva means any gathering that is for the sake of adjudicating halacha. When you have a gathering that is for the sake of psaktin, adjudicating halacha, or clarifying something in Torah, you give kavod to the senior sage, even if he's not the oldest person there. Right? So kavod, when it comes to Torah, is based on knowledge, not based on age. Yet, when it comes to mesiba, what's mesiba? The Rashbam says, shal mishteh v'odil nisuin. When it comes to a celebration, how do you give kavod? To whoever's oldest. So I'll say, so just like to give you an example, right? You had a simcha, who gets to bench? Okay, so leaving aside kohanim, I'm not leaving aside kohanim, right? So obviously kohanim take precedence, but you give it to the oldest person. What if he's not the biggest Talmid Chacham? It doesn't matter. When it comes to social things, we give primacy to age. When it comes to halachic things, we give primacy to wisdom over anything else. Incredible. But this is only so if the greatest sage there is, like head and shoulders above the next person, or the next oldest person there. The oldest person there is much older than anyone else. In other words, in order to give primacy to wisdom over everyone else, so that person has to be mamish, like considerably wiser. To give primacy to age over everything else, that person has to be considerably older. Rabbi Shmuel Silber. The daughters of Tzlafchad were all equal in piety. Shneimar, Vatiyana, Havia Echad Kulan. They were all treated the same. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Benos Tzlafchad, Hutshuli Nasa Dechal Hashvatim. So this is beautiful. So the Benos Tzlafchad, now we'll say, we've been kind of skirting this issue a little bit. Now we're going to tackle it. Who did Benos Tzlafchad marry? So Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel that Benos Tzlafchad were allowed to marry whoever they wanted. They had the right to marry whoever they wanted. Shneimar, L'tov Beineim Tiana L'Nashim, because the pasuk says, marry whoever, literally again, marry whoever you want. Elamani Makayim, Ach L'Mishpachas Matavim Tiana L'Nashim. So here's the problem. So also, we're going to see right here that there are two contradictory inferences. On one hand, the pasuk says, marry whoever you want. But then it also says, make sure to marry within the tribe of your father. So which one is it? Which the Gemara says, Eitza Tova Hisyon. So in other words, it was good advice. What was the good advice? The good advice was, look, you know what, at the end of the day, this was a big deal. Daughters getting Yerusha. It was the first time that it happened. So to kind of make sure that just to minimize any potential tension, what should you do? Ideally, marry within your tribe. Did you have to marry within your tribe? No, they could marry whoever they wanted, but it was an Eitza Tova to try to marry within the tribe itself. Incredible. Mosiv Rabba, so I raised the kasha, and more alehen. So the pasuk says, and more alehen. Now, the pasuk over here, and more alehem darsechem called isha sheyikra mikem kol zachem ela kadoshim asher yakdishu bnei Yisrael laHashem u'tumaso alav nechrasan nefesh shehi mifne milefanai ani Hashem. So we'll say this is talking about over here. consuming karbanos in a state of ritual impurity. So the Torah says if you go ahead and you consume karbanos and you're tamei, so there's kares, penalty of kares. So look what's happening over here. So the Gemara says as follows: Emor alehem. Now the way the pasuk is phrased is say unto them. So what could we infer from this statement of say unto them? La'osin ha'omdin al har Sinai. So Emor alehem refers to the people who are at Har Sinai. So in other words, that generation. So Moshe Rabbeinu, the group Moshe Rabbeinu was speaking to, that's ultimately who this halacha applies to. L'doros seichem. Then when it says for future generations, elu doros haboim. That refers to future generations. So the Gemara says, in Nemar avos lama nemar banim, in Nemar banim lama nemar avos. So we'll say, so here's what's interesting. So the Torah seems to be going out of its way to what? The Torah is going out of its way to go ahead and tell us that this halacha, specifically about eating kachim, sacrificial items in a state of ritual impurity, applies to both. We'll call it the fathers, meaning the generation that this halacha was given to, and subsequent generations as well. So the Gemara says, why? Why don't we generally assume that when the Torah says something, who does it apply to? Who does it apply to? Everyone, right? Everyone. So why does Torah have to go out of its way over here to talk about, again, halacha l'maisa that applies to the fathers and the children, to which the Gemara says, mitnei, to teach us the following principle. Sheyesh ba'avos masha'in bebanim, v'yesh bebanim masha'in ba'avos. To teach us, this is incredible, that there are certain things that apply to the children that don't apply to the fathers, and certain things that apply to the fathers that don't apply to the children. In other words, Rabba said that there were certain halachas that only applied generationally, did not apply for all time going forward. Incredible. So let's give some examples of that. For example, the chol bas yoreshes nachala. So for example, it says by the fathers, in other words, by the generation of the desert, it says that any daughter who inherits, what should she do? She should marry into her own tribe. So the Gemara wants to suggest that the obligation for a daughter who inherits to marry into her own tribe was something that only applied episodically in the desert, did not apply for future generations. The harbi mitzvos netstavu barim shalom netstavu olos, and we'll say there are many mitzvos that the children were commanded to do that the fathers did not have an obligation to do. What was an example? That's what Rashi points out there. For example, trumas, maestros, shmita, mitzvos hatluyos baretz. Right, so ultimately, again, mitzvahs are dependent on Eretz Yisrael. So those were commanded ultimately, again, to the children who entered into Eretz Yisrael, but were not commanded to the fathers. Now we're commanded in the deserts. Good. So Gemara says, therefore, hutzrach lomar avos, hutzrach lomar banim. So now that we see, by the way, interestingly enough, so now that we see that there are examples of certain mitzvahs that were said to the fathers, not to the children, or to the children and not to the fathers, that's why you see that sometimes you do need the Torah to go ahead and go out of its way. To go out of its way and highlight when a halacha applies to everyone. The Gemara says, Katani mihas, what do you see from here? Katani mihas, ba'avos hu omer, v'chol basi reshes nachala. What do you see from here? What it does sound like from here is that halacha l'maisa, at least for the generation of the desert, there was an obligation for girls who inherited to marry into their own tribe. Well, that contradicts what we just said before, because what did we say before? We said, Benos Slavchad could marry whoever they wanted. It was just an Eitzah Tova, a good piece of advice to marry into their own tribe. Here it sounds like, no, they had to marry into their own tribe. It's just for future generations, they can marry whoever they want. So the answer is that you're right. For other girls that applied, but not for Benos Slavchad. Benos Slavchad were able to go out and marry whoever they wanted, but Einachinami, for the generation of the desert, if other girls would have inherited, halacha l'maisa, they would have to marry into their own tribe. Amar, so the Gemara says, Amar, ba'avos hu omer, v'chol basi reshes nachala. So Gemara said, by the fathers, in other words, the generation of the desert, it says, which if you ever have a girl who goes out and inherits property, so she has to go out and marry in her tribe. So the Gemara says, ba'avos in, bebanim lo. Sounds like this only applied in the desert, but does not apply for future generations. To which the Gemara says, my mashma. So where do you get that from? Amar Rava, Amar Kra, zeh davar. Davar zeh lo yehei noeg ella bedar zeh. Because it teaches me again, zeh davar. When you say lashon of zeh davar means this is the halacha. Now the way the Gemara interprets that is, this is the halacha when? For this generation, and doesn't apply for future generations. And therefore, again, the Gemara is bringing this as a proof that for Benos Slavchad, for the generation of the desert, if a girl inherited property, so she had to marry into her own tribe. But for future generations, if a girl inherits property, she can marry whoever she wants. Amarle Rabba Zuti, the Ravashi, El Miata, but using this logic, Zah Davar, Dishchute Chutz, Hachanami, Delo Yehei Noeg Ela Bedar Zeh. So we'll say this concept of shchutei chutz. What's shchutei chutz? Shchutei chutz is if you shecht karbanos outside of the Beis Hamikdash, so there is severe penalties, kares, for offering up karbanos as the Beis Hamikdash. We'll say if you think about it also b'derech hashkafa, what's shchutei chutz? And we'll say if you think about it like this, what's the job of a yid? What's the job of a Jew? The job of a Jew is to be an or lagayim, a light unto the nations. Right? I think sometimes when we reflect back on the last year, it's very hard to contemplate that we're coming up now in the yard site of the Kiddushim of Simchas Torah. I think one of the things that, I don't know, at least I felt many times over the course of this year is, like, to heck with the world. To heck with being a Ar Lagayim. Like, who needs that? No one cares. No one wants it. No one's interested. And maybe the avoda of our dar is to circle the wagons and just to go ahead and build ourselves up. And what happens to the world happens to the world. But of course, it's not true, right? It's our sacred mission. It's our sacred mission to be out in the world, and it's our sacred mission to influence the world. I will say, but there's a danger with being an Ar Lagayim. What's the danger? See, in order to be an Ar Lagayim, what do you have to do? You have to be out in the world. But you have to be careful, if you're out in the world, about how much of the world you let back into you. You have to be out in the world, but how much? Because what happens? If you're too much bachutz, what happens? Shchutei chutz. Shchutei chutz. Sometimes a person can be geshacht. Sometimes, again, you can lose everything by being too much bachutz, by being too much on the outside. So this is the tightrope that the Yid always straddles. On one hand, I need to be out in the world. We have a mandate to be out in the world because we have a mandate to go ahead and accomplish things in greater society. On the flip side, we have to master this art of being out and being insular. Being bachutz, but not too much bachutz, because then that becomes shchutei chutz. So how do you influence, how do you impact, but at the same time not allow the chutz to come back into your pnim? Because the moment that the chutz comes into my pnim, that's unfortunately shchutei chutz. So the Gemara says, what about shchutei chutz? It says, zehadavar. Now I will say, now, what did we just say before? That whenever the pasuk says zehadavar, what does zehadavar mean? It applies only for the generation of the desert, right? Or for what we call the avos, the early generations, and not for now. So what do you tell me? Shchutei chutz only applied in the desert, doesn't apply for future generations? To which the Gemara says, Hachanami lo yehei noeg ela b'dar zeh. So what do you think? It's only going to apply in the desert and not to future generations? Shani hasam d'chsiv l'dorosam. No. Shchutei chutz is different. Why is it different? There's another pasuk. What's the other pasuk? L'dorosam. For future generations. We'll say Amud Beis. Good. So therefore, because it says l'dorosam, therefore halacha l'maisa, that's indicative that shchutei chutz applies even outside, even in future generations as well. Incredible. All right, we'll say kuf chaf on base 120b. Sammy, how am I doing on time?
18 minutes.
Good. 18 minutes left. Okay, let's go. On the clock. By the way, it's part of the tochacha to run even when no one's chasing you. I just want to point that out, right? And so the Gemara says as follows. So we'll say, here we go. Zehad davar. So we'll say this is interesting. So remember again, the problem we have now is the Gemara created a paradigm. What's the paradigm? That whenever it says zehadavar is a limiting phrase to teach you that this particular matter of halacha only applies for the generation of the desert, doesn't apply for future generations. So we'll say, so what about this zehadavar? And remember again, this is vaydaber Moshe al Roshei Hamatos Bnei Yisrael more zehadavar asher tziva Hashem. So we'll say, so this is talking about over here about hafaras nadarim, right? The ability to go ahead and annul vows. So you're going to tell me that the concept of vow annulment, at least by, again, a Talmid Chacham, only applies for earlier generations, doesn't apply now? Amrali, no. Hahu yolif ze mehasam. No. It's different because there's a gzera shava of ze from hafaras nadarim to shchutei chutz. That just like shchutei chutz applies for all future generations, so too again annulment of vows applies for all future generations as well. To which the Gemara, take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. The Rashbam says, first of all, the Tar Rashbam, Zehadavar d'Roshei Hamatos d'chsiv vaydaber Moshe al Roshei Hamatos Bnei Yisrael lemar Zehadavar asher tziva Hashem ish ki yidor neder hachanami lo yehei noeg ela hafaras nadarim ela b'dor hazeh b'tmiyah. So again, could it be that hafaras nadarim only applies ultimately in the generation of the desert? So next Rashbam, Yalev Zeh, the Hafaras Nedarim, Mizeh de Shchutei Chutz. So we make a gzer shava of zeh from Hafaras Nadarim to Shchutei Chutz. Just like by Shchutei Chutz, the zeh is in the same pasuk as the Dorosam, which teaches us that the prohibition of Shchutei Chutz applies to all future generations. So too, the zeh ultimately again, or zeh davar of Hafaras Nadarim applies to all future generations as well. Amalei, hahu yaliv zeh mehasam. So the Gemara says, "Hai nami leilev zeh mehasam." So if that's the case, the same way that we learn out that zeh mehasam, why not go ahead and learn out? Learn out. The Rasham says, "Hachanami in the iyan hasabas nachala." So it says also zeh by inheritance, by the inheritance of a daughter. So why don't you say that just watch make a gzer shava of zeh from hafaras nedarim ultimately to nachla, to inheritance, and say that just like halacha l'maisa, again, they have to marry into their own family, their own tribe, by the earlier generation for future generations. I should say differently. Just like zeh by hafaras nedarim refers to all future generations, so too the zeh by nachla. Specifically, that a daughter has to marry into her own tribe if she inherits property. She'll survive for all future generations. To which the Gemara says, "Hi, mai." So bishlama hasem itzri chalei l'gzera shava. So I'll say, I understand. In the case, ultimately, again between Hafaras and Shchutei Chutz, you need the gzera shava. Hacha l'mai itzrich. But I will say, by nachala, why do you need the gzera shava? After all, lishtik kra minei va'ana yadana deladorosu. So I will say, here's what's interesting: is halacha l'maisa. At the end of the day, the pasuk could have said absolutely nothing by nachala, and had it not said something by nachala, I would have understood that what applies. And I was supposed to say the default is whatever halacha applied in the desert also applies to future generations as well. So don't say anything by nachala at all, and the default would be that halachos of nachala apply for all future generations. So we'll say, so ultimately again, but the fact that the pasuk said zeh hadavar when it didn't need to indicates to us that what? That the halacha concerning nachala, i.e., that if a daughter inherits property, she has to marry into her own tribe, was only a halacha for the generation of the desert, and is not a halacha for future generations. Incredible. So Mar says, "My gzer shava." By the way, what is this gzer shava that she's talking about? This saying, here we go. Ne'emar kan zehadavar, v'ne'emar lahalon zehadavar. So we'll say it says over here zehadavar, and it says over there also zehadavar as well. So the Gemara says, "Ma lahalon Aaron ubanov v'chol Yisrael." So we'll say, so just like over there, it refers to Aaron, his sons, and all of Klal Yisrael. Afkan Aaron ubanov v'chol Yisrael. So again, just like by Shchutei Chutz, ultimately you're both say who is particularly enjoined, who is particularly prohibited from Shchutei Chutz? Aaron, his sons, and all of Klal Yisrael. So to Hafaras Nedarim, who's involved in that? Aaron, his sons, and all Klal Yisrael. Okay, so the Gemara says, "Umakon Rashi Matos." And just like over here, it's even referring to the heads of the tribe. Ultimately, again, here also it's referring to the heads of the tribe. We'll say, take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. The Rashbam says, "Mag zer shava tiafinan zedin adarim v'zed shchutei chutz me'adadi." So what we're specifically referencing over here is the gzer shava of zeh between shchutei chutz, the prohibition to shecht karbanos outside of the Beis Hamikdash, and ultimately again hafaras adam, an annulment of vows. So the Gemara says, why do you need this gzer shava? So look one more at Rashba. Ma lahalon b'shchutei chutz ksiv behu daber al Aaron ve'al bonov ve'al kol bnei Yisrael af b'nedarim Aaron ubanov kilu ksiv b'hem v'chol Yisrael kin nefarsh kaman. So we'll see. So just like by shchutei chutz enumerates Aaron, his sons, and all of Klal Yisrael. So too again, by annulment of vows, it's going to also include Aaron, his sons, and all of Klal Yisrael. Now what that means, we'll see in just a moment. Furthermore, the Gemara says, just like by Shchutei Chutz, it says Rashi Matos. Ultimately, again, so too by Hafaras Nedarim, it's also going to be Rashi Matos. So what's going on over here? So the Gemara says, so what exactly is this coming to include? So here we go. Amar of Achabar Yaakov Lomar Shafaras Nedarim b'shlosh hadyotos. So I will say, so what exactly is being included by Rashi Hamatos? What is that coming to teach us? It's coming to teach us that Hafaras Nedarim could even be done with 3 hedyotos, which again are 3 regular people. Back to our Nedarim days. Take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. Lomar Shafaras Nedarim b'shlosh hadyotos. The Rashbam says, "Dichsev lo yachal dvaro hu eino mechel aval achirim matirno." Kigon shlosha tahavu bezin kedamin besanhedrin va'afil l'shmuel damar hasam shnayim shedanu dinein din ela shnikru bezin chatzif Hanimili dinimonis. Aval mishrei isur neder lo sagi pachus agimos. So we'll say it's coming to teach us that halacha l'maisa. If you want to annul nidarim, you need a minimum of 3 people. Now again, the nice part is you could have even 3 regular people. You don't need necessarily Talmidei Chachamim or great rabbanim. Even 3 yotos, even 3 regular people, ultimately again is going to go and allow for hataras nidarim. Amar Rabbi Yaakov, lomar shafaras nidarim b'shlosh yotos. V'hai rosh hamatos ksibe. Here's the problem. By hafaras nidarim, it uses the lashon of rosh hamatos. So you're right. We were just saying before that Allah is coming to teach me that for a farzah, for an element of vows, you can even use 3 regular people. Here's the problem with that, which is it says Rashi Hamatos. Rashi Hamatos sounds like what? That you need chashuva people, right? You need chashuva people for Hataras Nedarim. So what's going on over here? The Gemara says Kida Amrav Chista Amrav Yochanan Biyachid Mumcha Hachanami Biyachid Mumcha. So it teaches us that there are actually 2 different mechanisms for annulment of vows. What are the two different mechanisms? 2 different mechanisms, either 3 people, right? 3 people, a beis din, and that beis din is comprised of who? Anyone, right? Anyone. Or you can have annulment with 1 person, as long as what? Then 1 person ultimately again is a mumcha. Mumcha means someone who's an expert in these matters. Umakan. So we'll say, by the way, I just want to point out, just so we get all the shonos right, so remember again, the 2 different types of annulment of vows, right? Hafaras nedarim and hataras nedarim. So hafara is what a husband does, right? Hatara is what a beis din does. So remember again, the fundamental difference is how does a husband annul his wife's vow? How does he do it? He just says mutalach, mutalach, mutalach. He doesn't, even 1 time is good. He doesn't need a reason. He doesn't need any type of pesach. Nothing. He just has the ability to go ahead and fundamentally eradicate it. That's different than hataras nedarim. Hataras nedarim usually needs some type of pesach. Remember from our nedarim days, some type of opening, charata or something else. Okay, I'm just pointing out because the Gemara is using the lashon of here of hafara and hatara a little bit interchangeably, but it's important to know that halachically they are very different things. Good, let's go back there. Umakan Rashi Amatos, Aflalon Rashi Amatos, Lamayilchus. So I'm supposed to say, so now, what is it coming to teaching when it says, just like over here, by Hafaras Nadarim it's Rashi Amatos, so too ultimately, again, by Shchutei Chutz, it's also Rashi Amatos. What is that coming to teach me? So Lamayilchus. So Amar Sheshes Lomar, Sheyesh She'ela Behekdish. So we'll say, this is incredible to teach us. This is fascinating that there is she'ela behekdish. Now, what does that mean that there's she'ela behekdish? So we'll say, take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. This is fascinating. It's in the wide lines, 4 lines down. She'ela behekdish. Kimo she'ela benedarim. The benedarim ksiv lo yachal dvaro. V'adin l'chol hekdeshos. Shimshachat kadshim b'chutz. V'nischayiv karis. V'achar kach halach eitzal chacham lahafti lo hekdesho. I will say, get ready for this. This is absolutely wild. Watch this. So let's say I go ahead and I shech the carbon outside of the base of mikdash. You know what can happen? Sometimes you're just so excited for that carbon, right? So again, I end up shechting carbon outside of the base of mikdash. So I have a great chab. I will say, this is why it's important to pay attention during Daf Yomi, because you never know when you're going to find a piece of information that is going to help you out when you are in a bind. Here is one of those pieces of information. So now you think to yourself, I shechted my carbon outside of the base of mikdash. Karis. There's a way out. What's the way out? The way out is to go to a chacham. And the shaila is, can I somehow... Now remember again, I will say, so making an animal hekdish is a neder. It's a form of a neder, right? In other words, when I'm makdish an animal, I essentially take upon myself a neder to bring this animal as a carbon. So now I shechted it. So now I have a great chab. I'm going to go to a chacham, and I'm going to get my neder annulled. I'm going to get my neder annulled. Now, what happens if I get my neder annulled? What happens? It turns out that what? That it wasn't hektish. If it wasn't hektish, then what? It wasn't shchutei chutz. So what did I do? Barbecue. That's what I did. I barbecue. Right? The Cholamite barbecue. Right? I sponsored Kiddush. Right? That's what I did. Right? So the Maisik, isn't that incredible? So listen to this. So the Gemara says, so back to Hashan for just a moment. So look at the words now inside. 4 lines in the wide lines. So just like again, you could have a vow annulled, right, by b'nedarim. So if I went ahead and I shechted a carbon outside of the Beis HaMikdash, and Chas v'Shalom now became liable to kares, V'achakach halach etzel chacham lahati lo hekdesho. And now I come to a chacham, and the chacham is matir my neder. Now, and I remember again, in order for him to do that, he would have to find the Pesach. Had you known that you weren't going to have that animal for your second day's Yom Tiv, would you have been makdish it? So let's assume again he finds me the opening. Umatzalo Pesach shel charata. He finds some type of opening of remorse. Va'akar as a hekdish meikaro, va'avdei ke hekdish bitaos. Iglai muslim afreya, delo have a hekdish me'olam. So I'll say, isn't that incredible? Isn't that incredible that there is a way to get out of I transgressed. Chiv kares. And now again, if I'm able to go ahead and be matir neder, I can go to the chacham again. I just want to point out, do you want to say absolutely amazing? I know you thought everything was amazing until now, but listen to this. Will say, what is this? What is this? This ability to go ahead and undo your mistakes. It's tshuva. It's tshuva. We'll say, it's Hoshana Rabba. It's Hoshana Rabba tonight. Tonight is the end of din. Tomorrow, right? Hoshana Rabba. The Zohar brings down the piskin, the petek, the little piece of paper with my gzardin, with my decree for the year, is being delivered from the Beis Din Shalma. The Hoshana Rabba is the chasimas hadin. It is the closure of judgment. So I will say, to understand what a gift this is, you may be like me, and you may realize that there are still many things that you did not do tshuva for. And so you might be thinking to yourself, it's too late. It's too late. It's already Silkis. It's Hoshana Rabbah. What good osai? So what do you see from here? Yesh she'ela b'hegdish. What are you talking about? You can be chayv kares. You can be chayv kares. And yet, there's always tshuva. There's a work. Rabbi say, whatever I've done in life, there's always tshuva. Now, here's the caveat to that. You may not be able to undo things that you've done to other people. That's a reality, right? We do things in relationships, and sometimes no matter how remorseful we may be, you can't always undo relationship damage. But that is the unique nature of our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That whatever I do, I can undo. That is the unique nature of our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Whatever I do, I can undo. A chiv kares. A chiv kares, the worst punishment possibly imaginable. And yet, even in a chiv kares, you could find a way to undo it. I will say, Halel Hoshana Rabbah. Incredible. So the Gemara says, so let's go back. So the Gemara says, I'm sorry. So we'll say, so therefore again, the Rashi Matos comes to teach me ultimately again that there is she'ela by hekdish. That you can go to a chacham, and even if you did shchutei chutz, you could be matir neder on your karban, and go ahead and retroactively, it turned out that I never shechted a consecrated animal outside of the Beis Hamikdash. Beis Shammai de Amri, ein she'ela behekdish. What about, let's say, here's the problem. Beis Shammai holds there's no she'ela behekdish. Beis Shammai says you could be matir neder for almost anything else. What you can't be matir neder for is hekdish. If you consecrate something, you cannot be matir that type of neder. You cannot be. So according to Beis Shammai, I'll just point out, by the way, you should know that this machlokes, yesh she'ela behekdish, or ein she'ela behekdish, is not just halachas profound hashkafa. So the thing is like this: when a person reaches a certain level of kedusha, the shaila is, do they have any more questions? Right? All of us are filled with so many questions. Why does Kadosh Baruch Hu do this? Why does Kadosh Baruch Hu do this? Right? Things happen in the world. We see suffering. We see difficulty. We see tzadik v'ralo, rasha v'tovlo, and we're filled with so many questions. So here's the shaila. When you reach a certain level of kedusha, do all of your questions go away? Maybe when you reach a certain level of holiness, there's no longer any questions. So I just want to point out, it's a machlokes. It's a machlokes. I'm sorry? Or maybe the questions go away. Like if you notice, by the way, Beis Shammai holds, ein she'ela behekdish. Beis Shammai says, when you reach a certain level of kedusha, there's no more questions. Not that you don't say you have the questions, but the truth is, I recognize the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to such a point that it's not even worth it for me to articulate the questions, not because I understand everything, but because I have such a heightened appreciation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that there's no more questions. Ein she'ela behekdish. Versus the first opinion, which is Beis Hillel, says, no, ein she'ela behekdish, right? Even at the end of the day, no matter how Kaddish you are, no matter how holy you are, there's still questions. I will say, who's right? The Pashtos, it would seem to be it's Beis Hillel, yesh she'ela behekdish. How do we know this? Moshe Rabbeinu, at the end of Parashat Shmos, says, Lama hari osa la'am hazeh, lama zeh shalachtani. Moshe Rabbeinu says, Kadosh Baruch Hu, why are you doing bad things to good people? Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to Kadosh Baruch Hu, Moshe Rabbeinu saw Kadosh Baruch Hu by the sneh, and yet again it appears that Yesh She'ela Behekdish. Incredible. So according to Beis Shammai, he holds Ein She'ela Behekdish. So what does he do with the Gzer Shava? Disnan Beis Shammai Omrim, Hekdish Taos. Hekdish, it's very interesting, we'll say. So Beis Shammai says, Hekdish Taos. What does it mean, Hekdish Taos? If you accidentally consecrate something, look at the Rashbam, he says, Ked Mefarish Hasam, Ketzad, Amar Shor Shachar Shiyatza Mi Beisi, Rishon Hariyu Hekdish, V'yatza Lavan. Right, so let's say again, a person says, the first black ox that walks out of my house is going. What an ox is doing in your house is a different discussion, right? But the first black ox that comes out of my house is going to be Hekdish, and it turns out that a white ox walks out. Beis Shammai Omrim Hekdish. Beis Shammai says it's Hekdish. Hekdish, right? But you said black ox. No, you said first ox that walks out of your house. That's it. Beis Hillel Omrim Eino Hekdish, and Beis Hillel says it's not Hekdish. Or Gemara my time out Beis Shammai the Yolfi Tchilas Hekdish Misof Hekdish Mat Timur Afilu Betos. Okay, so we don't have to get into all the mechanics over here, but Beis Shammai says, so Gemara says this time Beis Shammai Omrim Hekdish Tos Hekdish. So Beis Shammai says even if you consecrate something by accident, it's still consecrated. Or Beis Hillel Omrim Eino Hekdish, and Beis Hillel says it's not Hekdish. It's not Hekdish. Hekdish requires kavanah, and therefore again the absence of kavanah does not create kedusha. The Gemara says, "Hi, zeh v'zeh my avdilei." So what do they do with the gzer shava of zeh v'zeh? So the Gemara says, "Hi, zeh v'zeh my avdilei." Zeh hadavar de shchutei chutz mi barilei. I'll tell you the following. We need it for the following halachas. So zeh hadavar of shchutei chutz, right? So zeh hadavar of shchutei chutz. So that teaches me what? Ala shochi tu chayiv ve'no chayiv ala molek. This is actually very interesting. So Rabbi says it's good to know. By the way, also, sometimes over a 3-day yontiv, you might run out of stuff to talk about at the table. It's always good. These are conversation starters, right? By the way, interesting fact. You're only chayiv for shchutei chutz if you shecht. If you do malika, you're not chayiv for shchutei chutz. Once remember again, what's malika? Malika is the thumb, right? Kohanim would grow up their thumbnail, and what they would do is they would, by bird offerings, you don't shech the bird offering. Instead, what they do is they hold the bird backwards with the neck facing the Kohen. Kohen takes his thumbnail, puts it into the back of the neck of the bird, severs the vertebrae of the bird, and flicks off its head. That's called malika. You gotta have you need fingernail, and also good thumb dexterity. Right? You need I'm sorry.
Dandelion for kids.
Right, lahavdil, right. So let's say. So interestingly enough, so halacha l'maisa. So the zeh hadavar by shchutei chutz teaches us, the gzer shava teaches us that ultimately, again, you're only chayiv for shchita b'chutz, but ultimately not chayiv from malika b'chutz. Zeh hadavar d'Rashi Matos. What does zeh hadavar teach me about Rashi Matos? Mibari le'lechacham matir ve'ein habal matir. As we were saying before, bal mefer ve'ein chacham mefer. Ultimately, again, to teaching the following, that a chacham is matir. This is what we were saying before. A chacham does hataras nedarim, but can't do hafaras nedarim. A husband can do hafaras nedarim, but cannot do hataras nedarim. So remember again, the distinction between those two processes. Hatara requires a pesach. In other words, essentially, in order to be matir a neder, you need grounds. You need grounds to permit it, right? Usually, what are the grounds that a chacham will use to permit a neder? Well, use charata, some type of remorse. Had I known now what I knew then, I would not have done this. I think a lot of us say that multiple times each day. Right? Had I known now what I know then, I would not have done this. So that's called hatara versus hafara. What's hafara? Gone, right? I'm erasing the neder. Now remember again, big difference. Husband only has a window on the day that he hears the neder, even if it's not the same day that she made the neder, but the day that he hears the neder. Versus hatara can be done whenever the chacham finds the opening to do it. So the Gemara says, "Zeh hadavar d'Rashi Matos mibari le'lechacham matir ve'in bal matir bal mefer ve'in chacham mefer." Incredible. So the Gemara says, "Ulu Beis Shammai the less gzer shava hafaras nedarim b'shlosh jotos minadu." So Beis Shammai, who doesn't know this gzer shava. So I'll say, actually, we'll pause here just a second. So just understand. So remember again, our major open-ended question, which is, how is Eretz Yisrael divided? Still not solved, right? So that Friya Machlokas is still in existence. That's number one. Now, the other raging dispute I will say is, here's what we have, is daughters of Tzlafchad. Contradictory psukim, or not contradictory psukim, contradictory phrases in the same pasuk. Did they have to marry within their own tribe, or were they permitted to go ahead and marry anyone that they want? That's machlokes. That's machlokes. What it sounds like the dominant opinion is that the Eitzah Tova, the good advice they were given was marry within your own tribe. But ultimately, again, they had the right to go ahead and marry whoever it is that they wanted. Now, interestingly enough, working backwards, we know they married within their own tribe. We know that they did that, right? That was, again, yesterday's daf, or this morning's daf. Yeah, this morning's daf. Today's daf, thank you. Today's daf, where, again, we saw they scrutinized the potential marriage partner, right? And that's why I didn't get married till closer to 40, right? Or our youngest was 40, right? So again, so it turns out they did marry within their own tribe, but machlokes, did they have to, or was it just simply Eitzah Tova? The other piece I would say to kind of contemplate over here, and again, this is one of these exciting dapim where there was just like a tremendous amount of information that was just like shared with us about a whole bunch of different things, halacha l'maisa. But one of the interesting things that we've seen is that lashon of zad davar. Whenever you see that lashon has to be very closely scrutinized, because that lashon could either mean ledoros, or zad davar could mean ultimately, again, just for the generation of the deserts, right, and not for future generations, or not. It really depends if there's another modifier in there as well. So we'll see now what we'll do is we'll stop over here for tonight. Chavra, a tremendous zuchos. Alachayim, L'chaim, we'll say we should be zocha mirat Hashem. First of all, to a piska tava, to a good kvittel. We should be zocha mirat Hashem, to a chasima tova. We should be inscribed in the Sefer HaChaim for a year filled with mazel, with bracha, with besoros tovos for us, for our families, for all of Klal Yisrael. We should be zocha mirat Hashem, that it should be a year where we see our holy hostages returned. It should be a year, mirat Hashem, when our precious soldiers are zocha to be successful in fighting Am Yisrael's wars on all fronts, and are zocha to wipe out the terrible scourge of evil that has afflicted our people for so many years. We should just be zocha mirat Hashem, that it should be a year of besoros tovos. We should be zocha mirat Hashem that comes next year. We won't be learning in this sukkah, but we'll be learning in sukkah of Oro Shalev Yasan, the sukkah of Mashiach. One thing will be clear, or one thing won't change. One thing won't change. We'll be learning together. That Emirat Hashem will be zocheh to do for many, many years to come. We don't want the chevra to change. The only thing we want is for the location to change. Hallelujah, we should be zocheh to the chevra staying constant, and to location change. Emirat Hashem, Hirab Yameinu, L'chaim, L'chaim. Yeah. Chaver, we're starting Chasidus in just a moment. Please feel free to stay. There's going to be a nice spread of food also. Mir Hashem.
How many Masechtas we just touched?